Peace family, this is Davon Love, Director of Public Policy, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. Doing a special live tonight. As you all who are supporters of LBS know, we're really vigilant during the General Assembly on issues that impact Black people. And one of the big issues that we've been working on this session is around the issue of police accountability legislation. But we cover the gamut. We a lot of things that are related to criminal justice are things that legislatively, we're a part of and that we advocate on and that we keep watch for. We find ourselves having to give this explanation, it seems, once a year. This conversation about the nature of crime and violence and how it actually operationalizes itself. And just some of the backward looking kinds of approaches to these issues that often get presented and pushed in the Maryland General Assembly. So I'm gonna first talk about Senate Bill 852, where I'm gonna just discuss, what this bill, supposedly does, and to use it as a way to talk broadly about just some of the deficiencies and conversations around public safety, race, criminal justice. And then I'm going to transition to talking some about a little bit of an update on matters dealing with policing and the legislation that we've been working on this session. So let's start with our conversation about Senate Bill 852, which is something that we actually caught wind of as we were observing the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee do its work on House Bill 670, which is the House of Delegates version of police accountability. And so we just happened to catch wind, as we've been watching the committee, we just happened to catch wind of this bill getting through. I made some phone calls to get a sense and read the bill to get a sense of what it does. Basically, one of the things that has become clear is that the public sentiment against the notions of mandatory minimums is something that is, pretty palpable. And so a part of what has happened is that there are ways in which legislators who are trying to push, mandatory minimums try to find ways around it. And so what we have in Senate Bill 852 are not kind of your standard mandatory minimums that we're used to from the 90s and the 80s. But what these are sentence enhancements. So changing certain things from misdemeanors to felonies that then trigger penalties that can be stacked onto a particular defendant's case, creating the leverage in the eyes of a prosecutor to be able to get more time, for these alleged, violent offenders that they would get through the system. Now, as we've said on a variety of occasions as an organization, violence is a real issue in our community. And I think too often people associate criminal justice reform and being smart on criminal justice with not caring about the issue of violence. And it's clear to me, the Republicans, because Senate Bill 852 is a Republican bill, and unfortunately, Chairman Smith and Vice Chair Wallstreicher, two Montgomery County senators that are in progressive districts, voted this bill out of committee. And, a part of what gets missing from the conversation, Republicans seem to be really prone to these sentence enhancements, the idea of increasing the penalties. And it totally misses the point, because the problem isn't that we don't currently have enough penalties on the books. There are already 5-year mandatory minimum sentences for the use of a handgun in the commission of a violent crime. There's already a 5-year mandatory minimum. And when you look at studies that have been done, particularly the National Institutes for Justice, years ago did a study that showed that the length of the sentence is not the biggest deterrent to crime. It is the certainty of getting caught that is the biggest deterrent to violent crime. That is a question of the effectiveness of the police department. And the police department in Baltimore City, which I'm sure this bill is targeted toward, but even jurisdictions around the country, around the state rather, what we know is that police departments have been operating in ways that result in the killing and brutality of Black people and brown folks around the state. And what we know is that police departments, particularly Baltimore City, has a lot of corruption, has a lot of inefficiencies. It is one of the most unaccountable institutions in the fact that particularly from the Republican side, right? Republicans in their ideological commitment to pro-police are unwilling to say a word about the ineptitudes of law enforcement, and that being the most important thing to address when addressing the issue of violent crime. Another way of putting it is, it doesn't matter how many enhanced sentences you put. All you're doing is exposing more people who are susceptible to get sucked into the criminal justice system, subjecting them to the possibility of doing more time, and therefore creating more people who would otherwise shouldn't be in jail, exposing them to an environment that is prone to criminality and produces the very criminal element that we're trying to address in our communities. So again, what Senator Smith and Wallstreck and other supporters would say is these aren't technically mandatory minimums, and technically they would be correct. But the argument that we're making is what they've done is change certain misdemeanors to felonies as a way to trigger certain penalties, to enhance sentences as the mechanism by which they would argue this deals with crime. And here's the saddest part about it. I know that Senator Smith and Senator Wallstrecker and other supporters of it, I got to include Senator Ferguson, the Senate president. I know that these folks are smart enough to know that Senate Bill 852 will not have a positive impact on the issue of violence in our community. I'm sure they're smart enough to know that. And it pains me that what this seems to be is the kind of performative politics of signaling to what we call the purple districts in Maryland. Those districts that may be progressive on things like, same-sex marriage. They may even be progressive on, spending more money on education or environmentalism. But when it comes to issues that deal with Black people and criminal justice and race, that they tend to be more conservative, and they're capitulating to a population that is conservative on these issues because of the inherent ways in which notions of anti-Blackness, the notions of inherent Black criminality are a part of the collective American consciousness and drive policies in ways that produce mass incarceration and many of the other systems that do harm to Black people in our community. And so, again, it's a shame that it seems every year I'm having to do this explanation as to why it is that sentence enhancements actually don't solve the problem that they say they want to solve. But what I know is that this is a political signal to capitulate to people who are indifferent to the very points I'm making as to how this approach actually does harm to the community. And it's sad that that's the place we're in, where we're capitulating to folks who have no regard for the humanity of Black people as a result of their societal socialization. So that's important to know about Senate Bill 852. And so we urge you all, call your legislators, let them know to vote against Senate Bill 852. It's going to be important. We hope that it's not something that would be viable in the House. We hope the Senate has enough, courage to just reject Senate Bill 852. And again, it's just very disappointing. And again, let me extend a little bit further just on this point of Democrats in Maryland. This session has been extremely frustrating in a state that has a Democratic Party supermajority, that we should not have any problem getting the things that my organization and other organizations that are on the left want, things that now are common sense and in some ways mainstream. Being this Democratic Party stronghold, this should not be this difficult. But a part of what we're observing is we're observing people in leadership, Senator Smith and Senator Wallstrecker, who in many cases have voted with Republicans on issues that the other Democrats in their committee, aside from one Democrat, Senator Michael Jackson, who's a former police officer, so he's pretty much a Republican. Senator Smith and Senator Wallstrecker are voting with Republicans where the other Democrats are not. And it's just important that we're clear that we're going to hear a lot of people talk about being progressive, people being champions on racial justice, and even this, this voting sheet that's on the list. This is a really important when you look at the breakdown on this, because you see again, Vice Chair Wallstreicher, Chairman Smith voting with the Republicans, voting with, Senator Cassidy, Senator West, Senator Bailey, Senator Huff, and then you see Chairman, Will Smith, you see Vice Chair Wallstreicher, and then you see the Democrats who voted against it, who voted against this bill. And this was something that wasn't on our radar, but something we just happened to pick up on. So we're glad that we were able to pick up on it and get people's attention. But it's just important for people to be clear about why LBS takes the position we take when there are people who, again, folks, and let me give an example. And actually, I wasn't going to give this example, but I think this is important. When a few weeks ago, Senator Smith, Senator Ferguson, Senator Wallstreicher on the floor, they talked, Senator Wallstreicher talked about Senator Smith being, the first Black chair of the committee, that judicial proceedings was a committee that there were slave owners on when it was started in 1832. And now the person who chairs it is a descendant of slaves. And to me, this is an example of the kind of performance politics, right? The thinking that, just sheer identity. And then Will Smith got up and talked about his identity and his heritage, which is his prerogative to do, but that has nothing to do with shifting the balance of power as it relates to law enforcement into the hands of Black people, right? Though that is not a substantive conversation about the issue of dealing with racial justice in our community. So, I bring that up just because it's really important that people are clear that our frustration with the Democratic Party leadership has been its insistence on wanting to look as much like it's doing change while still maintaining a lot of the fundamental structures we're trying to shift. So with that, just want to transition to policing. And I gave a little bit of an update on this on our Streets of the State House podcast last night towards the end. One of the things that, I want to update folks on is that one of the things that we're poised to get, and this is one of the things that I would argue is an accomplishment, is that it looks like we're going to get a good version of Antons Law passed. Antons Law being a piece of legislation related to the Maryland Public Information Act. This would allow the public to get access to police investigatory records. Those records are currently prohibited from public disclosure. Now, one of the things that was put in the Senate's version of LEOBR repeal was the inclusion of the ability for police to expunge their records after 3 years. And if you remember, LBS put out its summary on what we felt was wrong with Senate Bill 627. And these expungements were one of the things that we identified as one of the amendments, the FOP amendments that both Senator Smith and Senator Wallstreicher voted on in their version, which is one of the reasons why we ultimately testified in the House in opposition to Senate Bill 627 as it was amended. And so this is something that if you watch the proceedings from last night, that this is something that we're going to have to fight to make sure that police officers are not able to expunge their records, because then that would defeat the whole purpose of being able to get these Public Information Act request documents such that we could look at what exactly law enforcement was doing internally in terms of how it was disciplining officers, so we can make more informed assessments of what police departments are doing. So we're hoping that we're able to put enough pressure to make sure that the expungement language that was put on the LEOBR Senate version does not negate the progress that we've been able to make. And I want to give credit both to Senate judicial proceedings, particularly Senator Carter, for passing the strongest version of Maryland Public Information Act reforms that were necessary and being able to get access to these records, right? And so our hope is that the Senate wouldn't negate the progress that it made by passing out such a strong Maryland Public Information Act piece of legislation by allowing law enforcement to expunge their records. And again, I'll just reiterate what I mentioned last night during our Streets of the State House podcast, that, LBS and the larger coalition that we've been working with over the session, the Maryland Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, is not pleased with any of the versions of LEOBR reform, repeal and replace language. We're not satisfied with either one, particularly around this question of community oversight. And while the House gets a little bit closer with their police accountability boards, those police accountability boards that their bill mandates the creation of in every county doesn't actually have the power to adjudicate and impose discipline. And again, we've always argued that the reason we even focus on LEOBR is because it got in the way of dealing with community oversight and control of law enforcement. And so our hope is that we're able to maintain the work that we were able to do on the House side. Shout out to Delegate Deborah Davis, who was really a force in making sure use of force was done effectively in the House. It looks like we're going to get that version of use of force. The work that Senator Carter was able to do on Antons Law and making sure that we got that bill out of the Senate. And we're probably going to have to do more work in the future on LEOBR, repeal and replace, to make sure we get authentic community oversight. But that's where things are. So just wanted to give you all that update. Again, the commentary that I mentioned earlier about just the ineptitude of Democrats. It's just really frustrating being an organization. And let me add this too, because I think this is just important context for those of you who are supporters of LBS and the work that we're doing. One of the things that the Democrats are afraid to do is that they're afraid to really lean in and really invest in building up a black voter base, a black and brown voter base that can actually, fight back against the Republicans they seem to be so afraid of. And so what it says to me is that they're so unwilling to actually empower Black people. They're so unwilling to actually do policy towards Black folks in the community that they're willing to allow Republicans to walk all over them and allow Republicans to reverse the work that they say that they want to do to move Baltimore in a place that is in the direction of racial justice. And so I think it's important that you all continue to do the work of reaching out, retweet this broadcast, retweet our action alert, contact your legislator, continue to have conversations, because that is going to make sure that it pushes the ball forward. We just wanted to give you all that update. Thanks again for tuning in and listening to what we have to say. Continue to support us and continue to support the work. This is Davon Love, Director of Public Policy, signing out.